There's nothing more fun as a book reader than seeing it come to life on the screen, but it rarely works out. But when it does work out, it really, really works out. So here I was about 2 years ago talking about my favorite times that has worked out. Hey, what's up, bookworms and couch potatoes? Mike here today to talk a little bit of movies and more specifically books that became very popular movies. Now, I want to lay a couple ground rules down here first. First up, I will not be including series as one movie. So, for example, if I said it was a Star Wars book, I wouldn't say the Star Wars trilogy. I would name that specific book and movie. So there'll be none of that. Also, if there's a big movie that you're expecting to see on here, but I have not read the book, all of it's not going to be there. For example, The Godfather. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies ever. Haven't read the book. So my rule is I need to have read the book, obviously, and then the movie. And also, I want to take into consideration if I thought that it was a faithful adaptation of said book. Some differences is fine, but when you're talking about something like The Shining, obviously that's not going to be here because I love that book, I love that movie, but they are not very similar at all. So things like that will be excluded. Now, these are in no specific order. These are just some that I thought of off the top of my head that I really enjoyed the book and I enjoyed the movie. And let's go ahead and kick it off now with the big one here. Fellowship of the Ring, 2001, based off of Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is still probably my favorite experience in a movie theater ever. Yes. And the reason why wasn't necessarily about how it just wowed me like a Jurassic Park or Star Wars or something did as a kid, but for me, this was the first time I had ever had something that just visually represented what I always saw in my mind's eye when I read a story. This story had been dear to me for a long time. So when that movie came out, and my expectations were guarded. Yes, everything about it looked really cool. All the pre-production, it seemed like everyone involved seemed like it was a really good idea. But I still had that wall up because a year prior, Dungeons and Dragons came out and it was awful. So I had my expectations down here. And by the time he got to the Mines of Moria, I was just a mess in tears because I could not believe they had actually pulled this off. Saw that movie in the theater 7 times, by the way. I'll have to tell that full story sometime when I get into my Lord of the Rings stuff later this year. But that is obviously my favorite one. Yes, all those movies are great. All those books are great. But for me, Fellowship really stands out because I felt like it was the closest to what was on the page. And you just can't beat that first time of going to the theater and having that visceral reaction that I had. And it was just an emotionally powerful movie for me for more reasons than one. And I absolutely adore that movie. Next up, we got Apocalypse Now, 1979. This is based off of The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And the big difference here is he changes it. Francis Ford Coppola changed it from being in the Congo to being in Vietnam. And I thought that it captured the hopelessness and the imperialism of the Vietnam conflict just brilliantly. Some of the most amazing descent into darkness I've ever seen on the screen. If you watch the behind-the-scenes filming of that movie, there's a lot of stuff that just... Some things that Coppola did that were like, wow, that is not traditional filmmaking. And some of the things that he did to Martin Sheen in the making of that movie are really, really just, it's just bewildering. You can't imagine what it was like being on that movie set. And it's a story that I feel like a lot of people don't really like. Like, I know for a fact my wife absolutely hated In Heart of Darkness, so the fact that she will not watch Apocalypse Now because of that. But not only is that my favorite Vietnam movie or war movie, period, the fact that it's based off of a really cool book that I enjoyed in high school was really, really a nice touch. And I think that the movie, obviously I enjoyed the movie more than the book, but that's one of my favorite movies ever. So that's just kind of a high bar. And I know that a lot of people still consider that kind of a loose adaptation. I still think that it captures all those themes that Conrad put in there for sure. Next up, To Kill a Mockingbird, 1962, Harper Lee. This might be one of the most faithful book adaptations I've ever seen, and this is peak Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck is one of the actors of his generation. He was it, right? And I think that this was his best performance. I've probably seen about a dozen Gregory Peck films, and by far this one, he stands above the rest for me. Just a brilliant, brilliant performance, just ripped straight from the page. And I talked to my classics video recently about how much I love To Kill a Mockingbird, and that movie, being as faithful as it was, makes it very, very high on this list. I recommend you read the book, obviously, if you haven't, And of course, the movie is just terrific. Just a very, very powerful performance by Peck. The whole cast is great, but Peck just really just anytime he is on the screen, it is just magnetic. This was the toughest one for me. You guys know I'm a big Stephen King honk. Another rule I kind of wanted to have for this list was no multiple authors. I wanted to have one entry per author, because I could go on and I could talk about Shawshank Redemption. I could talk about The Green Mile. I could talk about Carrie. I could talk about It. But for me, the most perfect Stephen King adaptation is Stand By Me in 1986, which is based off of The Body, the novella in different seasons, the collection. And I think it just kind of, because it captured the heart, the time period, and yeah, just the heart of the story perfectly. A big problem I have with Stephen King adaptations is they always try to modernize everything. Like with It, moving it to the 80s and then present day, I thought that harmed it a lot. And it took away a lot of the charm from the book, from the coming of age story. With Stand By Me, they kept it in the original setting that King wrote it as. And I think that that really, really helped. And just, I mean, there are lines of dialogue that are just straight from that book. And there are a couple things changed, a couple things taken away, a few things added for the movie, whatever. Kiefer Sutherland as Ace is just spot on. And I mean, it captures the coming of age story, maybe the most perfect I've ever seen on a movie screen. Just an absolutely brilliant and beautiful movie that never gets old. I've watched it, dozens of times. And I think with me, a big thing about King, as I've always said, he knows how to write kids, because when you listen to the dialogue that he writes, and you're like, yeah, I can see that. A lot of things I watch or read with a coming age story, I'm like, kid, who talked like this at that age? That movie and that book nailed how all of us young boys talk to each other. And I think that's why it stands the test of time. And it is my favorite Stephen King adaptation as far as faithfulness. Overall, I'm probably going Shawshank, but it's got some changes from the book. But yeah, this is for sure easily my favorite as far as faithfulness, and then just a really great movie. And watch it if you haven't. Next up, I talked in my classic video about how I know there's a lot of hot takes about this, but I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I love Gone with the Wind, the book, and the movie. Margaret Mitchell, 1939, the movie came out. Adjusted for inflation, still the highest grossing film of all time. This movie was so big that it made Wizard of Oz be a box office bomb. That's how big this movie was. It was huge. And the thing is, as much as I feel like they kept as much as they could and they didn't shy away from it, I mean, a 3-hour movie in the 30s was like, what in the world are you doing, right? And so they still didn't have everything from that novel in it, but I love that they were meticulous about it, and they kept so much from that novel. They didn't try to get it down to a 90-minute movie to try to maximize profits or something like they do today. There was no Warner Brothers with Justice League. Hey, we got to get this down to 90 minutes so we can get it, as many movie sales as we can. Then you get no sales at all. I never thought I'd talk about Justice League when talking about Gone with the Wind. But for what I said in that classic video is I feel like the book and the movie is just a perfect snapshot in time of America at its lowest moment, the Civil War. That would really, that or Vietnam conflict, I think, are going to be your 1-2 on that list. But with me, it's just an incredible achievement for the time period. Just some of the special effects, the powerhouse acting performance of Vivian Leigh and Rhett Butler, not Rhett Butler, what's his name? Clark Gable. Just amazing performances in that movie all the way around. And it's just a movie that I feel like has just grown over time as just an all-time classic. And I love that Technicolor look. I watched the black and white cut, and it was okay. But yeah, that Technicolor look, to me, that is the movie that defines Technicolor. I love that look and that aesthetic, and it's still a brilliant watch today. Next up, something a little more modern. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Now, I'm talking about the 2009 Swedish version. I watched that, and I watched the David Fincher American version. I think it was 2011 or 12. I didn't care for the U.S. version that much, but I rather loved the Swedish version. And I've only read this first book. I read it actually last year, and I really enjoyed it, and then watched the movie right after. And I really liked the 2009 version. I felt like that was the better representation of Lisbeth, and I think Lisbeth, freaking feminist icon. She is awesome. I could not get enough of her in that movie. She is just absolutely steals every scene that she's in. I feel like the movie kind of tried to lean more on Blomkvist than it did on Lisbeth, but yeah, she's just phenomenal in that movie. And anytime she has a victory, you're suffering with her, but you're also sharing those victories with her. She's awesome, and I look forward to actually continuing that series soon. But yeah, I recommend the extended version that they put out on Blu-ray of the Swedish cut of the film. That I think that is the far superior version of the film. I'm not going to go this far without having some Harry Potter on here, and I feel like Harry Potter movies get kind of a hot take. People either are upset that, Chamber of Secrets and Sorcerers or Philosopher's Stone, depending on where you're at, that they were basically page-for-page adaptations, and people didn't like that. Like, okay, so you get mad if it's changed, but you get mad if it's the same. For me, I think the perfect mix of the two was Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. We were so lucky to have a director like Alfonso Cuarón do a Harry Potter flick, and I think people need to recognize that. Yes, there were changes from the book. Did it keep the big moments? Absolutely. Did it nail those big moments? Yes. Yes, it did. I love the look and aesthetic. It's how spooky that movie kind of feels at times. The Dementors, absolutely frightening. I loved it. I thought it was a brilliant adaptation, and I think this was the first one where the kids finally embraced their roles so much and were becoming better actors and actresses every one of these movies. And this is the first time, especially for Daniel Radcliffe, where I was like, that dude's going to be a star. And, he might not have done much. I mean, he's still doing stuff. I don't want to sit here and talk about Daniel Radcliffe's career. But it was a time where I said, okay, he's not going to be Mark Hamill, where the only thing he's really known for is Star Wars and then doing some voice acting. He's going to have a career outside of this. So I love Prisoner of Azkaban. I think it's my favorite book, so it is obviously going to probably be my favorite movie unless they butchered it like they did Goblet of Fire. They did not. I felt like it was a really good balance between source material and a few things that the director wanted to put in himself. So that one would be my favorite. 1992, moving along here, Dracula by Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker's Dracula, I remember when this movie came out, it was huge. It was amazing to me because I was like, well, horror always never really does that much. And here's the thing. They sexied it up. And I kind of blame Anne Rice for that. Anne Rice was really having that big, huge career revival in the 90s, and everyone was kind of getting into the Vampire Chronicles, and they got kind of sexy at the time. So I felt like with Bram Stoker's Dracula, they kind of sexied it up, and that was okay, though. It stayed mostly true to the original story, had some really good performances. Winona Ryder was terrific in that. Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing, awesome. Keanu, come on. I mean, this was a good movie, I think, that people don't give enough credit for. Yeah, there's some things you watch now and you're like, yeah, it's kind of hokey, but I mean, it not in any way that 90s movie-making charm didn't have, that early 90s where they were so kind of clinging to the 80s a little bit. But it was violent, it was R-rated, it had a brilliant soundtrack, to the fact that when I'm going to reread Bram Stoker's Dracula for my Fright Fest I'm doing in October, and I'm going to listen to that soundtrack like nonstop when I read it, because I can't not think about the music from that movie when I think about Dracula at this point. I feel like you just kind of put them together now. But really, really good adaptation, even if they did, try to romanticize it a little bit. But I thought that it worked really well. Just fantastic cast. I mean, Gary Oldman, awesome cast, awesome movie. Speaking of Anne Rice, all I can think about usually is like, oh, God, did they shit the bed with Queen of the Damned? Oh, that was an awful, awful movie. But you know what wasn't? Was Interview with the Vampire, 1994. Tom Cruise might not be what I pictured as Lestat reading those books. I'm big-time Anne Rice. Got the whole thing back there. Big-time Vampire Chronicles fan at the time. And when that movie came out, I was like, Tom Cruise, that is not... I mean, I like Tom Cruise as an actor, but that's not what I pictured Lestat. But he nailed it, in my opinion. I thought he absolutely was wonderful in that. That was before too many people really knew a lot about Brad Pitt. I think he'd only done Legends of the Fall was his biggest movie up to that point. For me, that was the movie that made Brad Pitt more than just a pretty boy. That was when I was like, okay, this guy can actually act. And again, another one, Armand, never pictured Antonio Banderas, but you know what? After that, I can't picture anybody else as Armand. So really, I think that the fact that it was actually pretty faithful. I mean, a lot of the dialogue was word for word good in that. So even if the casting wasn't what I imagined, I think the cast did a great job in that movie. And it's another one that I think's aged well. It did not shy away from the violence and the more horrific moments in that, with the barmaids. I think they're really just disturbing moments in that book where Louis goes to the theater and just freaking murders everybody. It did not shy away from that. It was violent as hell. And another one where the soundtrack, it just, boom, just nailed it perfectly. I wish that we would have got more of that. We'd have got more of that cast in Queen of the Damned. That would have been better, and maybe do Vampire Lestat the proper way. But who knows what really happened with that? I don't even know if this was like a cult classic at this point, or if that was a big hit or not. I mean, I didn't know very many people who didn't see the movie, but I don't know what the deal was with them not being able to get the cast together, and if it was a rights issue with them not being able to make everything. But I think that would be one that would be prime for a remake, like as a streaming series or something. And I know that Anne Rice and her son Christopher have been talking about getting this Hulu series going, but I just think it would be. We're at that time now where Anne Rice did sexy vampires, but she still knew how to make them scary, right? Whereas now it's just straight sexy vampires is pretty much what that's all the genre is at this point. So I don't think that it would be anything faithful to the books or anything like that. I don't think it'd be for adults. They'd want to get that teen demo that loves them some sexy vampires. So I think this is the best we'll ever get, is Interview with the Vampire, as far as Vampire Chronicles goes. Next up, 1987, The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Yes, the movie is very, very Disney-fied. Yes, it is one of my favorite movies of all time. I can't think of a movie that I quote more often in my daily vocabulary than The Princess Bride. I mean, anything. I mean, the other day I was getting my kids some peanuts, and I said, "Anybody want a peanut?" And they had no idea what I was talking about. But, they will. They will. My oldest has watched it now, and he rather enjoys it. In fact, we were watching The Three Musketeers, which was also very Disney-fied from the original story. But we were watching the Disney's Three Musketeers the other night, and the whole time he's like, "D'Artagnan reminds me a lot of Inigo Montoya." And I'm like, I don't think that was an accident. But just same swashbuckling fun that was found on the pages. Yes, the book's a little more adult than that movie is, which you would expect with something to be a little more Disney-fied, family-friendly like it is. But family fun in the best way. I think that no matter how old you are, male, female, it doesn't matter. The Princess Bride is for everybody, and it is a wonderful, wonderful movie that shall not ever be remade if you want to not have riots at your doorstep. So do not remake that movie. It is a brilliant movie, and it's on Disney Plus, guys. Watch it. Next up, let's talk about, I just talked about Three Musketeers. Talk about some Alexander Dumas. Now, I was going to put Three Musketeers on here, but again, I'm doing that one author rule, one book per author rule, and I'm going to stick with The Count of Monte Cristo, the 2002 version. Yeah, they messed around with the ending a little bit, but I definitely felt like the themes, obviously revenge being the big one, and then fate versus free will of Edmund going through his trials in that story. It's very difficult to adapt this book because the unabridged version is massive. It is a beast. It is huge. So trying to get that into an under 2-hour movie, I think they did the best that they absolutely could. And like I said, yeah, they fudged the ending a little bit, but it didn't change the story for me. It had that same feel. And I don't think we're going to get a better version of what I said in that classic video is the gold standard of all revenge tales. And it is really explicitly shown on that movie. Just an absolute wonderful demonstration of how to run the long con, no matter how long it takes. The revenge story, and I think that movie was very, very well done. I was very excited when I saw that movie. I was very, very happy when I left the movie theater, and I'd say check it out, definitely, if you haven't yet. Let's keep rolling along here. Something a little more modern here. 2009, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. One of the finest page-for-page adaptations I've probably ever seen. Not only is, Vigo's great and everything. Don't get me wrong. I'm a Lord of the Rings guy. I love Vigo. No matter, I even liked Hidalgo because Vigo was in it. I love Vigo. I think he is a wonderful, underrated actor. And it's hard to say someone's underrated when they've gotten Oscar nominations and stuff, and everybody seems to love him. But yeah, not only that, but I think it captured that sense of bleakness, of hopelessness, of a dystopian time perfectly, that a lot of movies, they just like, oh, let's just throw some dirt on everything and let's just throw some debris on the ground there. We've got a post-apocalypse. That one, the aesthetic that they did for that movie was just perfect. That gray overtone of everything. It's just wonderful. And a lot of people like that game, The Last of Us. When I played The Last of Us, I was like, wow, this really feels like The Road meets like The Walking Dead or The Stand. That's really how I felt about it. But yeah, that movie, easily one of my favorite adaptations, just for the fact of how faithful it is. It even has the Coke scene in it, and that was just like one of the parts in the book that really just stuck in my memory. So wonderful, wonderful direction job, wonderful acting, and again, just that aesthetic. They captured that feel. You just felt just hopeless. And I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't watch a movie to feel like that. Well, that's what that book was. And I haven't read any other Cormac McCarthy, but I'd like to. I really would like to, because I loved The Road, the book and the movie. Just excellent all the way around. All right, moving along here. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Which version? The 1960 version. They have fudged this movie up so many times. They always try to put some kind of Morlock king or something like that. They always try to put a romance subplot in it. But the 1960 version, I think it still holds up, because not only is it true to the text, but the Morlocks are freaking terrifying, and the Eloi definitely present that sense of innocence, that Wells really tried to get across, and like the something like the books being like just things we don't. Oh, we have books, and he tries to turn up and they just crumble to dust. People don't have any interest in books and things like that. Just so many themes from that book come across in that 1960 version, and some of the makeup and special effects when that movie was made, just phenomenal. And the very, very famous depiction of the time machine that you see in pop culture was from that movie, and I think it's aged rather well. I watched it and War of the Worlds. I had a DVD that had both of those on it. War of the Worlds, it's one of those things you could be like, yeah, that was impressive for the time, but I feel like Time Machine is still very, very watchable. Good performances all around, and the makeup crew should definitely have won some kind of Oscar or something for that. I don't know if they did or not. I didn't research that, because who researches these things? 2005, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. The first Narnia book. Disney had it in their hand. They had a mega hit of a franchise, and they squandered it. I don't think they expected this movie to be as big of a hit as it was, which is weird to me. I was like, okay, we just finished Lord of the Rings, 2 years prior. People are still itching. They're still hungry for some fantasy. And you have J.R.R. Tolkien's best bud, C.S. Lewis, his franchise, Narnia, in the palm of your hand. You have a hit with that first movie, and then you drag your feet forever for Prince Caspian. Prince Caspian comes out, and it's like, wow, you guys really, really, really overdid it on the CGI in that movie. And people just lost interest. The kids started aging too fast. They dragged their heels in production, and we got as far as Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and then just kind of stopped. And I know Netflix has the rights to do this series now, and I hope they do. I hope they do it faithful. But I don't see how they could do The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe any better than that did. I thought that the kids were great. Yeah, I still had some problems with Peter. I felt like he wasn't ready to be a lead actor yet. I thought he was better, actually, in Prince Caspian. But as far as in Lion, Witch, Wardrobe, I felt like he was the weak link of that cast. Lucy was just absolutely adorable and perfect. Edmund, oh my God. Mm-hmm. Nailed it. But man, Aslan in that movie gave me absolute goosebumps, and the White Witch was absolutely as terrifying as she was when I read that book as a small child. So right there with Lord of the Rings and Fellowship for me was one of those where, okay, Lord of the Rings was something that was just epic to me, and it was grand in scope. But to me, Narnia was always something that I loved from my youth as a child. And when I went in there, it gave me, it sounds so cliche to say, but it made you feel like a kid again. And I enjoyed it. I'm glad they didn't try to, PG-13 it up or anything like that. Disney was perfect, I thought, for Narnia. And I feel like they really, really dropped the ball after this, because that first movie, spectacular. They even nailed talking freaking animals like no other movie could do. I mean, it always just looks phony, and that was really good. They even let the Santa Claus scene in. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant movie. I love it. I wish we'd have got more of that cast. 1982, Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard. This is more of a mashup of several Conan stories, that movie is. And it captured the world pretty well. Yeah, I do feel like it did leave some things out about Conan. Like they did just kind of just make him a brute, which he definitely is not. He's actually very intelligent in the source material. But I mean, just Arnold, that's the definitive Arnold role, I think, that or Terminator, right? I mean, that's just an iconic role for him. It's like you can't picture anybody else. I love Jason Momoa, and then I was just like, I just don't see him as Conan. He's just not Arnold, right? So yeah, I think it really gave an identity to that character. It gave a renewed interest into Robert E. Howard's stories, which I think are severely underrated. I think he's a severely underrated author, which is amazing because he is very, very well respected in the fantasy community. But again, that guy had like a living, breathing universe to his world, even before Tolkien. And I think that needs to be recognized. And I think that Conan the Barbarian put a lot of new eyes on that. I got into the comics a lot as a kid after I watched that movie. So yeah, it definitely put him into my way of looking at the pop culture of Conan and things like that. And that movie was a big reason why. The follow-up movie, not so much. But I mean, that seems to be the case with this. That's why you don't see a ton of sequels on this list. Last one here. The only popular author to have his literary works destroyed more than Stephen King is my guy Michael Crichton. And I'm talking about Jurassic Park 1993. Yes, there are extreme differences between that book and that movie, but it still helped introduce me to one of my favorite authors of all time, and Michael Crichton. After that movie came out, just like everybody else, I got interested in Michael Crichton, and I just ate up everything that guy had released. I talked about Michael Crichton in depth, about how much he meant to me as a teenager growing up in the 90s, and Jurassic Park is a big reason why. Yes, that movie has aged wonderfully, and it changed the way that movies were made forever. You know, the advancements in special effects and CGI that movie made. It was the first to do it. And what's amazing is, like, you watch those new Jurassic Park movies, and they don't look as good as the one that came out in 1993, which is amazing. And I don't know if that's still when Spielberg still had that magic, I think, maybe. But yeah, it changed everything. And like I said, I think it's aged really wonderfully. So while it is much different than the book is much more scary, much more thriller, little bit of horror in there. I mean, this is the techno thriller guy here, but I still feel like that movie captured the characters. It captured a lot of it really well, even if it was still kind of simmered down a little bit for the family audiences. And you know what, Spielberg was right, because he got that money, right? He got that money for that movie. And that is my list, guys, of books. There are lots that you're going to probably say, what about this one, this one, this one? I probably haven't read it, or I just didn't think of it. These are the ones I thought of off the top of my head. Movies that I love and books that I've read and really enjoyed as well, maybe love. And as I always say, there are no wrong answers on this, but hit me with some of the ones down below. The biggest one I got when I announced I was going to do this video was LA Confidential. I have not read the book, guys.